Hi, this is Jeremy Jansen, and I'd like to welcome you to the July 2010 issue of Reason Wizardry. This is a milestone issue for us in two different ways. The first is that the July 2010 issue starts off our second year of Reason Wizardry production. We started back in July of '09, and it's been a very successful year so far, so I'm happy to continue on. The second milestone is that this will be the last issue that uses Reason 4. As you're probably aware, Reason 5 will be released in August, and so for the August issue, we will be transitioning to Reason 5 and examining some of its new devices and capabilities. For this last Reason 4 issue, I wanted to summarize and show just how powerful Reason can be. It's especially powerful when considered as a modular device, because just like Reactor or Synth Edit or Synth Maker, you can create just about anything you want using CV and combinator controls in Reason. So for this issue, we're going to push that to the max and create a hybrid synth that uses many different synths inside as well as effects. Hopefully, by the end of this, we'll have a useful hybrid synth as well as a tribute to the capabilities of Reason 4. So we're going to create our hybrid synth pretty much from scratch, and my goal for it is to use the Subtractor, Malstrom, and Thor, each to the best of their capabilities. Now, before I get started, I want to discuss the limitations. The only real limitation when creating a custom synth is that your synth will be monophonic. CV signals, as we've talked about many times in Wizardry, are monophonic in Reason, except for one specific case. So when you think about that at first, that's quite limiting, but if you look at it in a different light, it's still very powerful. Consider that many people spend thousands of dollars creating custom modular instruments from different rack modules. Well, no matter how much money they spend, in general, all these custom modular instruments are going to be monophonic. So in the modular world, the modular hardware world, I should say, monophonic is already the standard. So just because we can't get polyphonic sounds doesn't mean it's a waste of time. You can always add two instruments and give them two separate sequences to create a chord if you'd like. So the limitations are now stated, and let's move on. The first thing we're going to do is go old school and start with the Subtractor. I want there to be a Subtractor in this hybrid synth, and I want a particular feature to be highlighted, and that feature is phase offset. Because actually much of Subtractor can be duplicated with Thor, so there's not much left that's unique to this older instrument, but this phase offset is unique. It's not easily duplicated using Thor, and without getting into the math behind it, it's a different kind of phase modulation, and it has two different modes: multiplication or subtraction. So we're going to use that as the basis for the Subtractor portion of the hybrid synth. So the first thing I've done here is actually created a Subtractor and then duplicated it with a very basic initialized patch, a fully open filter. So now we're going to flip that around and we're going to route up both Subtractors to this mixer, actually on the same channel, because we're going to get a stereo Subtractor sound by slightly detuning each Subtractor. Okay, now Okay, so it's pretty basic. Now we're going to get some initial combinator mapping going so that we can control the phase offset feature. So let's open up the combinator programmer, go to Subtractor 1, button 1, and oscillator 1 phase mode. The same for the next subtractor. Oscillator 1 phase mode. And we want them both to be in a range from 0 to 1. All right, and for rotary 1, we're going to link that up to oscillator 1 phase diff. All right, now we should be able to control the phase rotary of both subtractors at once, as well as the mode button, which switches between multiplication and subtraction. So let's hear how that sounds together and if it's working correctly. So that's a start. We're going to stick with the sawtooth waveform for now. And next, we're going to move on to adding a Malstrom. All right, our next project is to add this Malstrom to our hybrid synth. I've already added it and hooked it up to the mixer and turned down the subtractors so we can just hear the Malstrom. I've loaded up the VS Waves grain table, which you may be aware is actually the waveforms from the Prophet VS classic synthesizer. So we can hear how that sounds. Okay, so what we're going to actually do is not have any motion on these waveforms. We want to actually use this more like traditional Prophet VS and choose which waveform we like. So in order to do that, we turn motion on both of these down. And now you just hear a single waveform, okay? And we also want a stereo output similar to the subtractor, and that's why we're using two oscillators. So we're going to slightly detune the oscillators against each other. And we're also using the spread parameter, which spreads the two oscillators in opposite directions across the stereo spectrum. We just need to properly route them. Here we route oscillator A to one side, and here we route oscillator B to the other side. Okay, so we've got a stereo Prophet VS waveform. Now let's open up the combinator controls and get this rotary map to both oscillators waveform control. So rotary 2 on Malstrom 1 is going to control oscillator B index 0 to 127. And once again, rotary 2 is going to control, this time, oscillator A index. All right, now these two controls should move as one. So there's a wealth of different interesting waveforms in there we'll be able to use in our hybrid synth. Now, as for button 2, we're going to use that to change the shift parameter of both oscillators. So button 2 is going to oscillator B shift. And it will go from 0 to -30. And now we'll do the same thing for oscillator A. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way to copy and paste combinator mappings? Just a dream, I suppose. Okay, so we've got that both set up in there. And it's working properly. It's just shifting the formant of the oscillator down. So it could be useful for more mid-range or low-range sounds with our hybrid synth. Now I've muted the first two elements, the Subtractor and Malstrom, from our mixer, and I've added a Thor to our hybrid synth combinator. So with a Thor, there's so many different possible sounds that it's hard to pick out just one. So I'm not going to pick out just one. I'm going to use two Thors. This first Thor is going to be an FM synth. So let's add two FM pair oscillators. And let's use the mod matrix to send those to filter 3 in stereo. All right, so we've talked about this before. It should be fairly standard. We're just sending each oscillator, one to the left side, one to the right side, and then we're modulating that with amp envelope and slightly detuning each oscillator. Okay, so there we go. Now let's get the combinator programmer up here and map another one of our rotaries to Thor FM. So let's go to the Thor page of the combinator programmer, go to rotary 3, and map that to oscillator 1 mod from 0 to 127. Create another rotary 3 entry and go to oscillator 2 mod, 0 to 127. So now we should be able to control both of these knobs at once and hear the output in stereo. Sounds good to me. For button 3, we're going to add some envelope modulation to this FM effect. So to do that, we'll go back to the mod matrix here, and we will put an entry global envelope to oscillator 1 FM amount. Let's try this at about 60. And do the same for oscillator 2. And now set up a quickly decaying envelope. Hear how it sounds. Okay, let's raise this up a little bit, say 80 83 or so. Okay, I like that. Now we need to map a combinator control to turn this amount from 0 to 90. So let's go back up, go to Thor, button 3, and scroll way down to mod 1 destination amount. And that amount is going to be from 0 to 90. And we'll do this again, but with mod 2. And it's working well. All right, now I've added a second Thor, and we're going to get a different range of sounds out of it. Since the first few sound generators we've got are fairly digital, we've got the phase modulation, we've got wavetable from, or grain table from Malstrom, we've got FM from the first Thor. Now let's get some multi-oscillators using this Thor. And we're going to pretty much follow the same process as before. We're going to send these to filter 3 in stereo. A little bit loud. Okay, and now we're going to map the combinator controls to multi-detune and multi-waveform. So we'll start with rotary 4, and we'll use oscillator 1 mod, and then oscillator 2 mod. And we should be able to change the detune amount. Perfectly at once. Okay. And for the button 4, we're going to change the waveform from a sawtooth to a pulse. So oscillator 1, multi-wave from 0 to 1. Oscillator 2, multi-wave from 0 to 1. Okay, there's our final sound generator for our hybrid synth. All right, so we've got our 4 sound generators, and now is the point where we start tying everything together. And before I get to that point, let's just examine what we've got here. We've got the Subtractor with the phase offset controls. We've got the Malstrom with the VS waveforms. We've got the FM Thor that's also envelope modulated. And we've got the detuned saw and pulse waveforms from the second Thor. And these are all run into one mixer, and at this point, it's actually still a polyphonic instrument. So now is when we take it to a different level where it's going to become monophonic, but it's also going to tie it together into a hybrid synth. And what I mean by that is we want to run all these sounds through a single filter. So to do that, we need to take the master output from the mixer and run it into the audio inputs for this third Thor I've just created, and take the audio outputs from the Thor and send that to the combinator outputs. All right, now in the mod matrix, we take audio input 1 and send that to filter 3 left, and audio input 2 to filter 3 right. And let's add a low pass ladder filter. Now, we could still be playing polyphonic sounds even at this stage. But the problem is that if we want any envelope modulation on our low pass ladder filter, that's only monophonic because we're using the filter 3 slot, and everything in here, including the global envelope, is monophonic. So you'll get really strange sounds if you try playing something polyphonic through a monophonic filter. So it's best just to avoid that altogether. And let's just change all of our synths to monophonic. Legato. Okay, so we've got the filter in there. It's monophonic. It's working properly. Now let's start mapping some combinator controls. Well, actually, we're just about out of combinator controls in this case. All we've got left is the mod wheel. So let's map the mod wheel to the filter frequency. So filter 3 frequency. So this is a stage that I reach in a lot of my more complex patches, especially the epic combinators in Filter Research 2, where I've run out of combinator controls, but there's still much more that I want to do with the patch. And where do you go from there? And the answer is you need to use Thor rotaries and buttons. So we'll start with that because we definitely want to be able to control resonance. And we want to be able to control envelope amount. So let's get those mapped up here in the mod matrix. Rotary 1, going to filter 3, resonance. And for rotary 2 controlling the filter envelope amount, it actually works a little bit differently. You can't directly modify this envelope rotary using the mod matrix. Instead, you kind of work around it by going like this: global envelope, going to filter 3 frequency, and then you scale that by rotary 2. So now using the mod wheel in conjunction with the two Thor rotaries, we've got some fairly good control over our filter. Now we've got quite a usable hybrid synth. We can tweak the volumes of the different oscillators, you could call them, using the mixer here, and control their modifiers using the combinator controls. And even pan them. Okay, so now we could finish or we could continue, and I would like to continue because in this case we've got two more Thor devices that don't have rotary mappings yet. And when you make a patch this complex, similar to the epic combinators that I created for Filter Research 2, it seems like you need to do them justice by mapping all possible Thor and combinator rotaries to useful parameters. So, if you've been following Wizardry for a while, you may be able to guess what the parameter I want to modulate is, and it's filter FM. So to do that, I'm going to add a FM pair oscillator with no FM modulation, and I'm going to route that to filter 3 FM. So now we run into the problem of not only have we used all the combinator knobs, but we've used the Thor knobs on this device. So to get around that, we need to route these Thor knobs to parameters in the filter Thor. So to do that is pretty straightforward. I've already got it mapped here. Rotary 1 goes to CV1 out, rotary 2 goes to CV2 out. And I've connected CV1 and 2 to the filter Thor's CV1 and 2 inputs. So now when I route the oscillator 1 to filter 3 FM, I can scale that by the CV1 input. So that's filter FM. Now I also want to be able to control the pitch of the filter FM oscillator. And to do that, I'm going to use the second knob here, which has already been sent to CV2 output and through the CV2 input on the filter Thor. And I've already added this line to the mod matrix, which is just CV2 input to oscillator 1 pitch. I'm just tweaking it here because actually you need a value greater than 100 to reach the maximum pitch. So seems like you need around 86. What you just heard there was actually filter FM aliasing. And if we ran a higher sample rate, you'd get a smoother filter FM that doesn't have glitches when you turn up the oscillator pitch really high. But since we are at 44 kilohertz here, I needed to turn that down just a little bit more. It's still aliasing. Okay, so now that seems smooth throughout its range. If you could call something like that smooth, of course. So now, just to finish up with our hybrid synth, we're going to make a few final tweaks. Firstly, I've added a compressor to the master output just to tame the level in case you use some overly loud oscillator levels in the mixer. And beyond that, we want to map these last two Thor rotaries to some interesting parameters. So for the first rotary, I'm thinking a delay level would be nice. So let's try some tempo sync delay here. Okay, so we just want to control that level. And we're going to do that exactly the same way that we use these Thor rotaries to control filter FM. So let's open up this Thor and add rotary 1 going to CV1 output, rotary 2 going to CV2 output. Okay, flip the rack around and let's send those. We're going to use 3 and 4 because that's all we've got left. And now in this mod matrix, we'll map those CVs. So let's take CV input 3 and map that to our delay dry wet. Okay, now let's just add the parameter label. Okay, that's working all right. So now for our final Thor rotary, I'm thinking filter decay on the filter envelope would be quite useful. So let's go for that. Filter envelope decay. And it's already been sent over here, so we just need to map it up in the mod matrix. It is CV input 4. And we're going to send that to the global envelope decay and the global envelope release. We'll turn these down, set them both to around 80. Turn our cutoff down. Remember, cutoff is on the mod wheel. And now we should be able to control the decay time. All right, I had planned on wrapping up with the hybrid synth at this stage, but I'd actually like to add one more element just to highlight the modular nature of the hybrid synth that we've created. So just to summarize, we've got our four different synths that are really like oscillators in this larger synth, and they're all heading through one central filter. Now we can alter the signal path even more and say add a shaper before the filter, but we don't need to use a Thor shaper. In this case, I'm going to add a Scream 4 instead. We have to keep in mind where this is going to go in the signal path. We want it before the filter, so that means we want it to affect the oscillators, and the oscillators are all mixed together with this mixer here. So let's flip the rack around, and instead of the mixer heading out to our filter Thor up there, they're going to be sent through the Scream 4 first. Okay, I'm going to choose the tube algorithm, and let's hear how it sounds. So it adds some grit that's additionally filtered after it runs through the Scream 4. All right, so now we need some performance controls for this Scream 4, and we don't have much in the way of controls left, either Combinator or Thor controls. So we're going to create a new Thor, and we're going to use it just for its rotaries. So let's open it up and send its rotary signals out as CV signals. Okay, so now what we want to modulate, we definitely want to modulate damage control, and we'll say P1. So we'll take CV1 from our new Thor, going to damage control, and CV2 going to P1. All right, and now we can label our new rotaries. Contour. So even though we can control damage with this rotary, there may be times when you want to completely shut off the Scream 4 shaper. And that's a little bit difficult because since we're using CV signals, there's actually no CV input that will let us bypass the Scream 4 completely. We have to use combinator controls for this. Unfortunately, we've used all of them, so I'm going to have to sacrifice one of the controls that we created, and I've decided to sacrifice shift. So I'm going to remove its modulation, which is button 2 right here, and instead I'm going to map button 2 to our Scream 4. So there, with button 2, we can bypass the Scream 4 effect or enable it. So there you have it. There's our hybrid synth using 4 different sound generation techniques and the 3 major synths included in Reason 4. Of course, there's nothing stopping you from adding more Thor devices so you can get more Thor rotaries to control even more parameters in the hybrid synth. In fact, I'd encourage you to add 1 or 2 Thors and see what other interesting parameters you can come up with. So once again, thank you so much for watching during the first year of Reason Wizardry. I hope to bring you many more interesting issues focused on our favorite music software. Thanks, and cheers.